Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. DIY Dad here. Today we're going to deal with what I think is a pretty common problem, at least it is in my house. Everywhere you look and everywhere you sit down, you encounter free-range stuffed animals. This is a wonderful concept to have these things just flying around the house, but it gets a little bit out of hand. So today we're going to give my kids a method, let's say, for picking these up. We're going to give all these animals a place to go to kind of keep them contained at the end of the day. We are going to build a zoo. So like most of my projects, we're starting off with a sketch, and essentially what I'm going to build is a 32-inch by 32-inch box, three-sided box, with a piece of like plywood essentially that I'll put on the back and the bottom. So very first thing we need to do is get our materials. For this, I need four 8-foot 1x4s, a roll of bungee cord, and then some sort of a random kind of piece of plywood. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I have a small piece of kind of 1/8-inch particle board that I may end up using for this, or I have an old piece of 1/4-inch ply that we may use. Kind of see when I get a little bit closer which one we end up going with. Bungee cord is probably the single most expensive part of this. This roll of 100-foot bungee cord cost $18. Total, I'm at about 40 bucks as far as materials for this project. So then first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take our 1x4x8s, and I'm gonna cut the verticals. Since I'm only building 3 sides of this box, I need 6 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. So I'll set my table saw and line it up for 32 inches. I'm gonna cut 6 of these, all the same size, getting them as close as I can, and I'll sand the ends to make sure that they're exactly the same height. That way my eventual box will sit flat. Now for actually cutting these 1x4s, technically these are 8 feet long, so they're 96 inches. So if you do the math, I should be able to get 3 32-inch pieces out of a 96-inch board. That's assuming that these are all exactly 96 inches, and I can accommodate for the width of the blade and things like that. I'm not gonna worry about being that particular. I have enough wood here that I'm going to cut 2 from each, and then those scrap pieces that are just slightly shorter than 32, I'll be able to cut down a little bit and use as my crossbars. So we'll have very little waste when this is all done, but just to be on the safe side and kind of dodge around some of the more questionable parts of the wood, I'll cut 2 32-inch pieces from 3 of these 1x4s. My 6 boards are cut to 32 inches, so now let's deal with the crossbar. I want this to look 32 by 32, so we have to accommodate for the width of these. Now, common logic would say that these are 3.5 inches wide, but if you actually look at it, they're not. So truthfully, and this is really hard to do with one hand, each of these boards is actually 3 3/8 inches wide. Now, it's probably not that big of a difference that I actually have to accommodate for it, but I'm going to. So 2 of these at 3 3/8 would be 6 6/8, or 6 3/4. So we take 32 minus 6 3/4, we'll get the measurement that we need to actually run this at. So my 2 crossbars for the front are now cut at 25 1/4. The next step is to look at the pieces you're going to use, and since this is going to be the front face, I'm picking the nicest looking of the pieces, so anything that has like little scratches and stuff like this, I'm kind of setting aside, and then laying them out so that the best presentation side, the side that needs the least amount of cleanup, is going to be pointing out. So you'll want to mark that, or at least know which side is going to be the front, and then make sure if the next step you use the back. So this is going to be the front at this corner. My next step then is going to be to use some pocket holes to attach these. I have a whole separate video on how to do this, so I won't waste your time going through it here, but essentially I'll flip this over to the bad side where I've got some burrs from the saw and stuff. I'm going to drill my 2 holes for the pockets here and then run those into this piece. Now to make sure that this ends up perfectly flat, once I've flipped that over as well, I'm actually going to use this piece of old shelving that I've got that I know is flat, and I'm going to clamp these down to it. So I'll put some glue in this joint, press these 2 tightly together, clamp this to the shelf and this to the shelf, and then screw them together. That way this will stay nice and flush, and I'll have a nice clean joint when we're done. So here's the front face of what will be our zoo, all assembled and ready to go. And now that brings us to the side. Now for the side, really you can do whatever measurement you want as far as how wide you want this thing to be. My wife wants this to be pretty close to the wall, so we're only going to go about a foot wide or so and let the height kind of deal with the rest. So for me, I'm going to take 2 of the other face pieces for each side, and then I'll do the same kind of subtraction to come up with my measurement to go for the depth to line it up the way I want. Now, I'm pretty picky about things, and since the corner of this is something that a lot of people are going to see, I don't really like the fact that when I hook these up together, the presentation on the side is going to actually be a little bit wider by about 3/4 of an inch because of the width of that board. So I'm also going to take my table saw and I'm going to take 2 of these pieces and I'm going to rip them down 3/4 of an inch. So I'll lower that so that when you look at this corner, it's exactly 3 1/4 this way and 3 1/4 this way, just to make it uniform. You don't have to do that. Totally just my own little, this would bother me if I don't do it. So my pieces that are going to go against the front face are now ripped down to 2 1/2. These pieces measure out to 3 1/2. Put those together, you get 6 inches, which means I need 6-inch crossbars so that this entire distance is 12 inches. Okay, my 6-inch pieces are cut from one of the scraps of 1x4 that I had left over. So assembly on the sides are just going to be, pretty self-evident. So there's gonna be 2 of these, 1 of the narrower pieces and 1 of the wide. I'm gonna assemble them exactly the same way I did the front with a little bit of wood glue and pocket screws. And then we'll be able to put the whole thing together. Well, 3/4 of the thing together. So my main pieces are cut and assembled. So now I'm gonna build the box. I actually went ahead and using the 4th board that I had, since all of this up to this point has only used 3 of my 8-foot 1x4s. I used the 4th one and I cut crossbars for the bottom and the top. I don't think they're technically necessary, but it'll just make it a little bit more rigid since I do have young kids and they're likely to try to climb on this. So the next step then is going to be to assemble it. To do that, on my side pieces, I'm going to run a couple pocket holes. So I'll probably do about 4 given the height of this. So 1 at the top and then spaced pretty evenly down to the bottom. I'll do the same thing on this one. Those then get flipped on their side and screwed into the front face. And then I'll do 2 pocket holes on the end of each of these crossbars, and those will connect to the corners and we'll end up with a box. To assemble this then, you're gonna take the front face and lay it face down on whatever your work surface is, and then each of these side pieces will get placed and held so that they line up on this outer edge. To hold it, I'm gonna use this fairly new tool that I bought, sold by Craig, and it's a 90-degree or T clamp. So it auto adjusts for width, and based on how you place the material in, it'll either hold things at a 90, or if you have a situation where you've got a board and another one that bisects it perpendicular, it will do that as well. Kind of cool, holds it right at 90 degrees, lets you stabilize the material so that you can get everything screwed in. So I'll do a little line of wood glue down the side, and then I'll use this clamp to hold it in place, run my screws in, and we should have a nice tight fit. All right, so here is our zoo fully assembled. So I've got the sides on. I actually, after putting it together, really like having these crossbars on the top and the bottom. It makes the whole thing much more stable. And it's gonna make the next step, which is attaching the back and the bottom, much easier to do. After we get that done, the last piece will then be doing the bars, because what's a zoo without bars? So for this next piece then, I need to cut out the backing piece that's going to close in the back of this. Now, technically, we could probably leave it open. For our particular use, we've decided to put a back on it so that we can paint it and have it nice and clean up against the wall. For that, I'm gonna use that board, and I'm not gonna do anything fancy. I'm literally gonna take this box, lay it down on the board, draw an outline, and then cut that out. And then I'll just use my nailer and just nail that along the back so that that's nice and flush. We'll do the same thing for the bottom. Again, just sort of setting it on what's left of that piece, outlining it, and then cutting it out and just nailing it on. So I'll have a solid bottom and a solid back, and then we'll talk about the bars for the front. The back and the bottom pieces are cut. I test fit them, they work. I'm actually gonna wait though to put them on. I guess I could put the bottom one on now, but I'm gonna wait to put the back on because I think it'll be a lot easier to get in and deal with the bars if they're off. So looking at this, the bars that I'm going to be using are just a bungee cord material. So it's just like your elastic normal bungee cords. This happens to be 1/4 inch thick. It's what they had available for me. Unfortunately, they're all black. I wish that they were a little bit more kind of fun colors for the kids, but it's actually going to look pretty good, I think, in the space. So this side opening is 6 inches. And looking at it, I think 2 bars will work for that. So that kind of sets my spacing at 2 inches. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to make a bunch of 2-inch blocks, just cutting out of the scrap 1x4 that I've got. And I'm going to bevel the edge, which I'll show you, to allow me to then place those blocks along the inside edge here so that I can take the bungee cord and essentially just wrap it over and then down, around, and up and down across, so that you end up with nice, even, straight, elastic bars. In order to do this then, I'm going to wrap the cord sort of around the top block a little bit where it first starts, and then I'll use my staple gun and actually staple that to it. That's not going to hold it super tight, but given these aren't going to be really pulled on very hard, I think that that'll work for this particular use, because really it just has to be able to handle a kid reaching through and pulling a stuffed animal through, so it's not going to pull loose. So I'm going to cut those blocks, and I'll show you kind of what those look like. So for this step, I have my table saw set at 45 degrees. There's probably a couple different ways that you could do this, but just given the tools I've got, this will be the easiest. I'm going to take one of these scrap pieces, and I'm going to run a bevel on both sides. So I'll run it down here, and then I'm actually going to turn it and run it that way as well. The reason I'm doing that is I don't need these blocks to be very big. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to cut these this way at 2-inch spacing. So I'll get about 3 out of this one. And then I'll cut them this way as well, so that this one piece will give me 6 spacer blocks. For the sides, I only really need 1, or 2 rather, 1 on top, 1 on the bottom. For the front, I'm gonna need several more. So I'll start with the 6, kind of see how my spacing is and figure out totally how many of these I need. All right, so here's my little kind of assemblage of these blocks. And the way I'm imagining this working, if this is the kind of the rail on the inside of the zoo, I'm going to line this up just like that. Okay, so the bevel is facing in. And then this bungee cord will essentially lay right into that channel like that, dropping straight down then to the other side. And then for the spot where I have to mark it captive, I'm going to wrap it around this. I'm going to actually lift this up a little bit, wrap it all the way around, and I'm going to staple it here on the bottom. So that even if they do pull on it, the force of them pulling is going to be held here at the corner and won't pull this cable loose. With this bungee cable too, because it does fray, I'll also burn the end of this just to melt the nylon cable together. All right, proof of concept worked pretty well. So essentially I put a small amount of glue on the inside of this block and had measured where my 2-inch marks were, and then glued this down and just used 2 1.1" brad nails in my nail gun there just to hold it in place while the glue dries. Did the same thing up there, and then took the bungee cord, measured it out and cut it, and then used my staple gun and essentially just lined it up here, put 3 or 4 staples in it, ran it up around the block, down around this block, back up, around and back to here, and stapled the other side. Cut it off to length, used my lighter to melt the ends of the nylon so that it won't fray, and there we go. So we have one side. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll do the same on this kind of main face here, and might need a couple extra blocks. I think I'm gonna run out, but I still have wood that I can cut for that. Now with this, the one thing I haven't done yet is paint, and these are gonna be kind of in the way for painting, but the beautiful thing about the way this works is you can easily, since there's not too much tension on it, just undo this, paint it, get everything all dry, and then just restring this. So you can see I put a small amount of tension on because I don't want them kind of loose and flopping, but not that much. You can kind of picture it's just a little bit of a stretch to keep them tight. All right, for the spacing on the inside, you're gonna want a helper, somebody who can help you make sure that everything is set right. But essentially what you're gonna do is offset it. So I'm gonna be starting on this one and then working down here. So see how that one's kind of over there. So the cable will come off of this, and it's gonna run down here and go around this, and then go back up and go do. And that's a lot of work. So I'm gonna have my little buddy help me actually run that. And then when it gets to the end, I'll wrap it around this guy and staple it to hold everything. I'll do the same thing over there. So after your assistant helps, this is what you're left with. So I've got the lines running, starting here, working its way around, and from the outside, it looks like this. And as Henry will demonstrate, if you have to reach your hand through to get a stuffed animal, they just move out of the way. So if you had a big stuffed animal, do they stretch? Perfect. So then the last step of the project would just be putting the bottom and the back on and painting and finishing. So Henry and I are going to get to work painting this, and then we'll check in when it's all said and done and we've got some stuffed animals going in. So there we have it, painted, signed, ready to go downstairs and get loaded up with animals. Obviously it's nighttime now. This did take all day, partially because the paint took an awful long time to dry. Sign is just something I used on our vinyl cutter just to cut out and make it fit. I will say, if you're going to follow along and do a project like this, definitely do your painting before you string all the bungee cords. It makes it a whole lot easier. I ended up just unstringing all this and letting it hang kind of loose while I was painting, but still it would have been faster to just get it all painted before dealing with that step. I'm very happy also that we painted the back and the bottom prior to putting it all together. That made that go a whole lot quicker too. So I'm going to take this downstairs. I'll show you a couple pictures of what it looks like all loaded up in a moment. But this being the end of a DIY dad video, I owe you a dad joke. So why don't schools allow any testing at the zoo? They're concerned about all the cheetahs. All right, remember, the most important part of any DIY project is just to do it. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.